We've been talking with Rea from the Buckeye Institute about the fact that farmers' costs will go up 32%. They've got all the data. They support it in their new paper that's out. If we adopt all of these new rules that the Biden administration is pushing, and the family's grocery bills will go up $1,300 a year on top of all the other inflation that we're already seeing. So here's my question. Do we need these draconian climate policies? Is that what we have to do to save the planet? Or maybe this is just bureaucracy run amok?
No, I think it's bureaucracy run amok, because if you take a look at our emissions, they are going down while the economy is growing. And so our current solution is working. We're seeing people voluntarily making choices that they want to do to protect the environment. You know, and farmers consider themselves a lot of times stewards of the earth. So they want to adopt practices that takes care of the land, because if they make their land less productive, they harm their land, that means they're going to produce fewer crops the following year, and they're going to be hurting their own income. So farmers have every incentive to take care of the soil, to take care of the water, and make sure that we have good air. Yeah, and there's no question. And I think that the climate science is not settled, despite what we've been told, you know, and there's a lot of flaws in the data. For example, the heat island effect and so many other things. Are we warming? Are we not warming? But they're just cramming it down our throats, even when the data doesn't seem to support it. But one thing that I think is settled, if you make it harder for farmers to produce food, prices will go up. If you take away fertilizer, you'll have lower yields in your crops. Those things just seem obvious and true. Yes, absolutely. And Kevin, those are the direct costs. And I know you've done a great job pointing out the harms of the ESG movement. And I think one of the things we talk about in the report is how ESG is impacting the way farmers can get access to bank loans, get access to credit. That's kind of the indirect approach, because now farmers are having to report what their emission standards are, right? And so when farmers are getting a bad ESG score under some of these rules, that means they're not going to be able to replace farm equipment. That means they're not going to have access to seeds. That's one of the reasons you'll see in the report beef prices cost more than other types of grain crops, because these lower ESG scores are going to impact the farmer's ability to do their job, to be able to harvest, to be able to take care of their animals. And that, I think, is a pernicious innovation we've seen coming out of government that's been affecting everything from retirement portfolios to investment decisions by state politicians. And now we're seeing it's going to impact how we score farmers and how they're doing. You could actually describe this as an economic war by government and world governments on the farmer and farms. Absolutely. I mean, American agriculture is still an important part of the American economy. We export hundreds of billions of dollars of farm goods around the world. And I think, you know, higher prices here in the United States is alarming, but just as alarming is what I think is going to happen to countries that don't have as strong as a rich agricultural sector. Are we going to see more countries like Sri Lanka that are going to struggle to feed their family because they're not going to be able to have the food, much less be able to pay for it? Yeah, and the irony of all this is that will be worse for the environment. People may, we need to have more children, we need to burn coal, we need to do all sorts of things to respond. So the environmental effect is likely to be negative at the same time that we hurt people. So there are 7 different recommendations that I pulled. One of them is withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords. I think that's pretty obvious. 2, revoke as much of the IRA's net zero funding and tax credits as possible. Explain that one. Sure. You know, when the Biden administration passed, you know, their so-called a poorly named Inflation Reduction Act, they knew that this was going to have a big impact on farmers. So they threw $43 billion of subsidies into the Department of Agriculture to try to entice farmers, you know, to be able to adopt these policies. You know, I think a lot about, you know, Ronald Reagan, you know, when government sees that great quote, you know, when government sees something, you know, taxes, if it doesn't work, regulate it. And then if you kill it, then subsidize it. That's a lot of what's going on right now is you're jacking up prices on agriculture. So you're trying to throw government subsidies. We know the end result is higher inflation, again, higher prices on American families, higher taxes to pay for it, which should get rid of those subsidies. We don't need to move forward in that direction. Let the market work, save taxpayers money, and have the federal government stop spending.
Yeah, no, and what you're talking about is if we don't do that, we'll have socialized farms, big corporations, and the government owning everything. Okay, number 3, this is obvious. Congress must build bipartisan anti-ESG coalition. I believe in that. Then you said number 4, proactive and targeted ESG bans. We're totally in agreement with that. Number 5, pass laws preventing ideological ESG investment and lending. We've talked about that a little bit. Number 6, corporate and shareholder response to ESG metrics. Explain this one.
Yeah, so what we're looking at right now is that there's a great quote that came out that basically said cows are the new coal from an ESG fund manager, right? And so basically saying we're going to look and evaluate cows and score them as being poorly as we did coal a few years ago. So there's a lot of concern, I think, at the lens that a lot of these companies are looking at where they're tipping the scale against certain types of farming prices and really endangering what I think is a staple of the American economy and the food that we eat.
Number 7, promote good, affordable farming practices at the local level. Describe that one.
Yeah, well, farmers right now are always willing to be innovative in the crops that they grow. And so we want to make sure is that there's incentives in place that farmers know, for example, if they want to go to no-till, for example, a slightly more organic, less impact on their land, they know how to do that. Education is a better policy than government mandates. And we believe that farms are kind of the heartland of communities. And so farming practices that work best in Ohio may not work as well in Southwest Texas. And so we need to make sure that standards are adopted state by state, community, instead of this national one-size-fits-all where everybody is simply not an Iowa or Nebraska corn farm.